David Ryden joined the Hope College Political Science faculty in 1994, so it's a while ago. He has published numerous books and articles on the Supreme Court, the electoral process, religious liberty, and other topics at the intersection of religion and politics. Dr. Ryden has a BA from Concordia College, a law degree from the University of Minnesota, and a PhD from Catholic University of America. Dr. Ryden.
Good morning. Ooh, wow, how did that? Is that loud for you? Is that all right? Okay. I live in a household, here I am, empty chuckle. I live in a household that's female dominated. And so if I want to be heard, I feel like I need to project. And yet they end up shushing me like all the time, and so now I'm just apparently so much background noise, but I had to laugh. I made them, silence your cell phones. I took mine to double check to make sure. And there's a message from my youngest, Dad, where's your wallet? I can't find it. I need your credit card. So, they shush me, but they want my money, and they want my bank account, so. Anyway, it is a treat to be here. I love my Haspers. By now there are so many familiar faces. I feel a kinship. I am at the stage, yes, year 32 at Hope College. So am moving in the direction of retirement. And at which point I'm just wondering, then do I get to be in the cheap seats? And do others what you all have done to me, which is grill me and push back and test me, which is why I just love doing these Hasp talks. Invariably, I go back to my 18 to 22-year-olds and tell them, right? The people there's a reason politicians are more responsive to the senior set. And it's because you're here, you're knowledgeable, you're well-read, you're active and engaged. That's to be applauded. It certainly makes it fun for me to teach courses at HASP. I always just appreciate these experiences. They always kind of teach themselves. So you have an outline, the barest of outlines. So then that's really just there if you want to jot down some notes as we go. Or to kind of keep us on track, although I'm notorious for getting waylaid and sidetracked and taken down rabbit holes. And if we do that, that's perfectly fine. And there hopefully are note cards, index cards within reach. And so the one requirement is that you jot one or two things down on that note card before you leave. Okay, we have 2 weeks. I have my outline, but I want next week to be easy for me. I don't want to have to prepare, where my preparation will be looking through your note cards, okay, and probably trying to identify 6, 8, 10 common themes, questions, the kinds of things that are on your minds. I'm imagining we'll encounter much of them today. That's great. But it'll make my week much easier if you do that. So any questions on third parties? If you have any comments, one question that is sort of looming that I'm eager to hear people sort of comment on. Yeah, if third parties, what should they be about? What should their focus be? What should they add to a system if we think the two-party system is failing us? So that or anything else you feel so compelled to jot down on the card, please do it. Okay, it'll make my life easier. It'll make sure next week we're really tuned in to the kinds of issues that you are curious about. Sound good? So I have an outline. I kind of want to go through it, but if we don't get, well, if we get through 2 points out of however many there were, that's fine. I do not like to stand up here and lecture. If you know me, that I just, there are limits to my attention span. If I have to talk too long, I put me to sleep. Okay, I don't need that. So please, I'll try to remind myself to kind of stop regularly and take a pause, take a breath. This is not one where we wait till the last 15 minutes or whatever for questions or comments or reactions. I trust that will just happen as we go. All right. If I say something and it doesn't sound right to you, or it's not clear, or you want to push back, you have a question, just throw your hand up. Let's deal with those as they come up. Okay. Don't feel like you need to wait for a pause from me. Okay. All right. With that all being said, I thought it was kind of a clever title. Is it third party time? Critiquing the current state of the American party system. I was trying to figure out, well, before I do anything, how many of you are of the opinion that we would benefit from a greater third party presence in our politics? How many of you are of the opinion that we would benefit from a greater third party presence in our politics? Get your hands way up. Okay, Meg's not sure. She's kind of on the fence. But I would say about 80% of you. Okay, I'm filing that away. 80% of you are saying that. I'm gonna hold you to it. Okay, by the end of next week, I'm gonna ask you to put your money where your mouth is. None of this abstract, easy to sit in a chair and say, yeah, I want third parties. It's like the rubber meets the road when you have to cast a vote, or when you have to support someone who might be a third party. For those of you who have heard me frequently, I am not a partisan. I describe myself, and you've heard me probably use this phrase before, I am a pox on both their houses kind of person. I have a long, rich history of third-party votes. We're gonna, hopefully today or next week, we'll do sort of a quick kind of Cliff Notes version of the history of third-party movements and candidates in America. I will give brief mention to John Anderson in 1980, which is the year I cast my first presidential vote. So I can say that in this group and not feel too dated. But I cast that vote for John Anderson. And it's kind of, you know, I'm someone I've been accused of letting the desire for the perfect be the enemy of the good. I hew to that when it comes to presidential votes and the like. I have quite a wide kind of cast of characters I've cast a presidential vote for, including my spouse, including my best friend who I used to teach with, including the American Solidarity Party candidate who they line up nicely with my views on things, and so on and so forth. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not a partisan. At the same time, I have long been appreciative of the two-party system in America. And tend to think that the two-party system has, by and large, served us well over our 235 years of history, or whatever it is. So I'm coming from that. I'm not a partisan. I basically have been a fan of and a defender of the two-party system. It's kind of what I wrote my dissertation on and then published a book on. And so I'm coming from that perspective. But then as a critic or a critiquer of how our two-party system has worked in the modern era, let's say in the last 30 years, okay? Which makes me inclined to think, to be in agreement with the 80% of you that I think Third parties may, should have a elevated role in our politics, and we can talk about that. Okay, so that's by way of background. I thought I would start with some numbers. And we're gonna play, if it were a class, I would have brought a bag of candy bars. And I would jot things down and then have you like weigh in, and whoever is right or closest, then like I would throw you a candy bar. I'm on a diet, I'm not eating chocolate, I don't want to tempt myself, so. But so we'll pretend, okay? So I'm gonna jot down some numbers that I think are meaningful for different reasons. Tell me what you think these stand for. Okay, number one is, and if you can't see it, 3855. Hint, these are percentages, i.e. survey numbers. Any guesses?
Party affiliation,
Say again?
party affiliation.
Party affiliate, no. Good guess, good guess. There is a regular survey question in terms of tracking polls that is always asked, and it is how Americans feel about their government and their politics and the direction they are going.
Trump's popularity.
We'll get there. That's it. You're getting ahead of yourself. I got another number there. Yes. Now you, shoot, I just gave away the story.
Attendance increasing.
Oh, no, good. Right track, wrong track. Right track, are we on the right track? Are we on the wrong track? You can probably guess which one is which. Right? Right track, 38% of the public say it. Wrong track, 55%. Actually, that's not bad. We've been like well into the mid or high 60s or even the early 70s, low 70s for wrong track. But consistently, sizable majorities of Americans say wrong track. File that away. Again, survey numbers. Percentages of approval by the American public of the Democratic and Republican parties, respectively. Okay, so 33% of the public approve of the Democratic Party. This is the congressional, so the question is specific to the congressional parties. So Democrats in Congress, 33%. Republicans in Congress, 38%. The next one you can maybe guess based on this one. Disapproval. Disapproval, okay? Congressional parties, 66% disapproval of the Democratic Congressional Party, 61%. So again, at least 60% up, 6 out of 10. Here's the next one. You get to guess this one. Trump's approval ratings, right? And I left a little bit of a range because his approval ratings consistently low 40%. Okay, if you think I'm picking on Trump, right, we can go back to the Biden administration. The numbers were comparable, even maybe a little lower. Yes.
How old are these numbers?
These are all pretty current. Yeah, so like Trump, so the thing you should do, you can go to Real Clear Politics. That's the best place to get survey data because they take all the surveys and they compile them and they do averages. Okay, so Trump, this is probably within weeks. And he's actually a little bit of an uptick. He's closer to the 46 than the 40, but just, and then his first term, he was low 40s. the entire time. It was just immovable. I forget, but these are within the last few months. These are pretty contemporary. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll kind of cabin those off. How about this? If anybody gets this, I'll buy you lunch. Six, for people can't see it or online, 69, 53, 48. No, it's percentages. Yeah. Oh,
You're better off even or worse off.
no, good guess. Good guess. It has to do with preferences for third parties. Okay, so I forget who was talking about independents. Among independents, 69% would desire more third-party choices, a significant or a serious third-party choice. Okay, among Democrats, 53%. Among Republicans, 48%. Okay, among partisans, about 50, about half, right, want more third-party choices. Okay, here's another one, kind of in the same vein. Hint, this one comes from July, it's a survey figure, piece of data that comes from July 2024. That might help you guess. Kind of related to this. What was going on in July 2024?
You'd like to see a different candidate.
There we go. Man, way to go. Yeah, so by then we are, right, we have had the parties have, well, we know what happened on the Democratic side, but prior to that, right, we had the parties, they had their nominees. It was a Trump-Biden rematch, okay? And we had 53%, over half of the public wanted different candidates on the ballot than Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Like wanted different candidates for both of them, right? So over half of those surveyed wanted a completely different presidential matchup. Well, that's significant. Okay. Here are some other numbers, and this is going to be different. So the figures 219, 213. Congressional mix, right? Or the majority, minority, the party balance in the House of Representatives. 219 Republicans, 213 Democrats, 3 vacancies. File that away. Okay, file that away. This is sort of historically close. It's a historically small margin of difference between the majority party and the minority party in the House of Representatives. Right. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Back to the question on the 69, 53, 48.
Yep.
So when people ask for a third party candidate, are they looking for a protest vote? Are they looking for another party to win outright elections in Congress and in presidential election? Or a coalition government where like you want something in the middle that can go both ways and, you know, be more moderate?
That's a great question. So yeah, the question is like, what's motivating them to say this? And we will go into this in greater detail when we get down the outline a little bit. I can say a little bit about it right now. I don't want to dive too deep because it is important to know, right? There are different motivations that people have for wanting more voices or more choices on their ballot, right? And so we can go through some of those. I would say a lot of it stems from a basic sense that we are not heard by the two major parties and their candidates. That they tend to operate, what they do tends to happen apart from what we, the voter, say, desire our particular preferences. Okay, so the theme I'm gonna come back to again and again and again and again, when we think about political parties, we need to think about them in terms of representation. Okay, that's what parties do. And when I make the case for our two-party system, it's in those terms. Okay, and when I critique the current iteration of our parties, it's in those terms that they are not doing a good job of representing sort of the breadth that is the American polity. So if I would kind of be most kind of simplest, that's what I would say, right? But there are other reasons we'll get to. Sound good? All right. So yes, 219, 213. Here are a couple others that I think are interesting. And I'll tell, right, maybe you can guess why I'm stressing these. So people maybe can't see 19/18/1.
Senate openings by party.
Good guess. It does have to do with a Senate, the Michigan State Senate, the partisan breakdown. 19 Democrat, 18 Republican, 1 vacancy. File that one away, Dave. File that one away. When we think about third parties and how might they strategize and find ways to sort of penetrate the two-party block, and file that one away. Here's another one. So this is my current home for the last 32 years, Michigan. This one comes, I won't give it away yet. I won't give it away. 1/201. And it comes from my former home state of Minnesota, or God's country, as we like it. We don't do sports, but we do everything else well. Okay. State legislature, House and Senate combined, a total of 201 seats. The partisan divide in Minnesota, 1 seat. Oh yeah, I mean, that's like a story. It's a movie waiting to be made. After the last election, both houses were deadlocked, completely even. And so like they're trying to figure out what to do. We have these side stories. One of the Democratic House members got caught. She was from the Iron Range. That's Minnesota's version of the UP. She was up there and she broke into her ex-husband's house because she wanted to steal some memorabilia or mementos, and she was caught stealing. And she just got sentenced to years in prison. They haven't formally, like in terms, now here's a sign of like accountability, right? They haven't kicked her out of the house yet. What's it take? Apparently she had to kill her ex-husband, maybe, I don't know, right? There's been a death in the Minnesota State Legislature, right? So again, file that one away. Think about how that might be interesting. Okay. Here's one. 74,000. 370,000. 74,000. 370,000. Hint, we're talking about votes here.
People voted,
No,
the larger numbers for primary elections, the others for.
good guess. Hint, 2016. Hint, presidential election. Hint, margins of victory. Okay, the 74,000 votes Donald Trump's total vote margin in the 3 states that gave him the electoral college victory. Okay? 74,000 votes. 370,000 votes. The number of votes cast for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, in those same 3 states. Okay? His margin 74,000 in the same 3 states, the Libertarian got 370,000. File that one away. Okay, as you think about third parties, what are some strategies? Now that one, we can oversell the significance of that. Okay, because the Libertarian was probably taking more votes away from which candidate? No, probably more from Trump. Okay, Libertarians, right? They can lean left, they can lean right, but more kind of a fairly significant majority of Libertarians would be kind of right-leaning Libertarians. So when they vote, it's tending to come out of the Republican candidate's column. So that one maybe not that significant, but how about this one? $44,000 and 150,000. Okay, you should be able to guess this one. Hint, 2020. Hint, presidential election. Hint, votes cast. Who won the 2020 election? Mr. Biden. His margin of victory in the 3 states that gave him an electoral college victory, 44,000 votes. 44,000, okay? The votes cast for Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate in those same 3 states, 150,000. Now it's getting interesting. Right. Again, file it away as we think about strategies that third parties. So this is the question, right? Are third parties, are they spoilers? Do they want to bring an issue to the fore? What's their purpose for being? How they answer that question is going to produce different strategies, and we'll come back to these as some possible strategies. Any sort of questions here? Yeah.
Both historically and currently, all these third-party people simply have proven to be spoilers as opposed to serious possibilities.
Is that a statement or a question? Question. So are they just spoilers rather than, right, are they just looking to kind of tilt the main contest in one direction or the other? No, oftentimes, right? So when we get to look at some of the historical examples, you know, we'll look at Florida in 2000 in Bush v. Gore, right? And a state that Bush won by 537 votes, which gave him the Electoral College victory, 271 to 266. Right, and votes cast in Florida for Ralph Nader. Was he the Green Party then? I think he was the Green Party candidate. 97,000 votes. Spoiler, right? As we love to play the game of alternative histories, you know, take him out of the equation. It's like, okay, what would an 8-year presidency of Al Gore look like? Right? How would the Supreme Court have looked differently? Right? I mean, we can draw a whole completely different history, but for the presence of Ralph Nader. Okay, so oftentimes, spoiler, yeah, not always. So when we get to more of a history, we can talk about Ross Perot in 1992. And I would argue he was not a spoiler, that he was motivated by an issue or a set of issues. And that he actually kind of rearranged the deck furniture by virtue of his candidacy. Okay,
Don't stop. How much was the media involved in those earlier elections, and how much did they influence those percentages, as far as you can tell?
earlier as in, which ones?
2016, earlier.
You know, we will look at the various obstacles that third parties face, and there are a whole set of kind of structural, legal obstacles, and one of them just has to do with getting their name out there, getting their profile out there, right? There is a huge tilt by the media to cover the major party candidates. Certainly that's a bias unless you really have a sort of a unique Ross Perot-ian kind of figure who is loud and obnoxious and talks with that Texas twang and right, he's good copy, so he probably, and guess what? He got almost 20% of the vote, right? Otherwise, in your typical kind of the run-of-the-mill minor third-party candidacy, they don't get a lot of media coverage, they don't raise money, they don't have money at their disposal to do paid media. You know, they tend not to make their way onto the debate stage, right? So they don't get that kind of media exposure. So at some point when we are brainstorming about strategies, there's one, right? There's one that's, okay, how do you break through kind of the media, you know, blackout for minor candidates? And I would argue in a world of social media and technology, it is not all about money anymore. And there are lots of other ways to organize. Yeah, yep.
What percentage of people view themselves as independent? Like, I know, like, in general, more people identify as Democrat than Republican.
Yeah,
But I'm guessing that elections really get decided by independents for the most part. So what percentage of people, if you ask them, truly say they're independent?
yeah, well, good, I'm glad you added that word truly, right? So surveys show ever increasing numbers of people who self-declare as independent. And I want to say kind of the last surveys I've seen relatively recently, and this is like Pew Forum, who's there as good as it gets in terms of survey data. High 40s, I think the last one I saw was 46%. And then you have the Democrats and the Republicans who kind of evenly divided, maybe in high 20s, something like that. But as you said, how many of them are truly independents? And the answer is much fewer, much fewer. So, you know, many people, they want to preserve that independent status. They don't like being called a partisan, but if you pull the curtain back, they are consistently voting one way or the other. And so they're sort of closet Republican leaners or Democratic leaners. So it's hard to get that figure of like those who truly declare independence. As we've gotten into a world that's increasingly partisan and polarized and tribal, in fact, I would argue the number of true dependents is shrinking. And it's fairly small. It's relatively small. That does not mean it's not insignificant. Okay, that in a world of party parity, which is what we've had for several decades now, we have had parity between the two major parties, that it is still those independents who are incredibly important. Okay, but as evidence of the shrinking of the true independence, we can look at how the major parties and the major party candidates now run their elections. And it always used to be, you would once upon a time, Like when I studied politics as a student and then became a young teacher and was teaching parties and elections, I would always talk about the primary general election dance. Right, and so you would have to, the primary, right, if you want to get through your primary and win the true believers in your party, right, if you're a Republican, you gotta be Republican and more conservative. If you're Democrat, you gotta be more progressive, right? And so the primary process would push candidates either to the right or the left. And then come general election time, it's this dance back to the middle. And how can you make up for what you said in the primary context to get enough of that broad swath of voters in the middle to win them to your candidacy and to push you over the top. There's no longer that dance, right? That now, by and large, we have animature-based, mobilizer-based kind of elections. Okay, and there's not. I still think you're right. You are basically right that ultimately they have, and I would say this is one of the problems with our current iteration of the parties is they don't recognize that, and so they tend to sort of just stay with their partisans. Yeah, does that make sense?
Could this be an explanation of why we used to have 8-year cycles of party changes? And we probably are down to 4-year cycles because the parties have gone so extreme that the middle is turned off after every election, and so they swing the other way.
So that's gonna be my next. I want to sort of move forward because I want to make some observation based on these numbers, and this will kind of get us going. And I think I can answer your question as I do that. And if I fail to, remind me, okay? Because I want, based on kind of these numbers, I wanted to offer some generalizations that then will kind of move us into a more particular discussion of third parties and third-party challenges. So observation number one, based on those numbers up on the upper left-hand corner, is our political system is broken. It is broken, and people realize it, they feel it, they sense it, at least at the federal level, right? We can argue about what's going on at the states. I would argue there's some things that are leaking down. They're not still as problematic, but at the federal level, right, the system is broken. It is unduly partisan. It is unduly polarized to the point where now we have increasing acts of violence that are political in nature. It's tribal, so we have something called negative partisanship, where people have this tribal party identification that is actually motivated more by their distaste for those in the other tribe than it is for their affection of those in their own tribe. Okay, negative partisanship. Let me get through this. Okay, second thing is, and then the final thing is just like our major political institutions, like people sense they're not working, right? So the low levels of approval for Congress, right? Congress is utterly dysfunctional. And they have been for some time, right? Our system is so out of whack in terms of balance between the parties. We now have, right, a presidentially centered system where the Congress is largely a bystander, where presidents wield power in an utterly unrestrained way without regard for sort of constitutional arrangements or limits, and we're left with a Supreme Court and a federal judiciary that is somehow supposed to sort of manage all this. And I would say that's a problematic kind of set of performances by the federal institutions. Let me just mention these 4 observations and then I can take a pause. So number one, our political system is broken. Number two, our 2 main political parties are broken. And so that means our party system also is broken. Right, so that second set of numbers, right, people have, even as they're partisan, even as we tribal partisanship, right, we still have large numbers of people who are deeply dissatisfied with party politics as they see it. They don't like the choices they're given us. They are open, as those numbers suggest, in the upper right-hand corner, they're open to change. They're open to reform, to third and fourth parties, independent candidates who might sort of shake up the status quo and bring us some party system in government that is more responsive to the, and more competent, I should add. Okay, so, and I was gonna say, for evidence of, this is a little aside, for observations 1 and 2, a broken political system, a broken party system, I was gonna say, think and reflect on recent presidential elections. Going back to 2016, and then 2020, and then 2024, so over a 12-year period, 3 presidential cycles, surveys reveal in each instance we had historically unpopular candidates on both sides. Okay, in each of the 3 elections, historically unpopular. What's the definition of insanity when you keep doing the same thing and somehow expect different results? That's kind of the definition of it, I think. Okay, observation number 3 is that despite the desire for changes in the political party system and a significant preference for more parties, more options, more independent candidates, the system seems immune to those changes, and it seems insulated or impenetrable by meaningful third-party candidates. And so my third observation is there's this disconnect between how people feel and how they're judging the political actors and the parties and what actually happens, and what we're able to accomplish by third parties. And so the question, right, in terms of meaningful third-party candidates, I would argue we have to go back to 1992. So 33 years or something, without like a really serious or more substantial third-party candidacy. And so that and it's interesting because I would argue when I get into more of a particular critique of the major party systems, it's that what I call the modern era, and that's like 92 and 94 on. We can look at the Republicans, the Gingrich era, and them actually winning a majority in the House. And from that point on, that's what I call the modern party era. And it is one marked by deep dissatisfaction and the disappearance of serious third-party challenges. And that strikes me as a significant decline, okay? And so there's this kind of fatalism. I'm curious how you all will feel about that, right? 80% of you raised your hands and said you would be open to this, but how many of you feel it can actually happen, right? And I just sense we're kind of stuck. There's this fatalism about like any meaningful hope, any real hope for a serious third-party candidacy, okay? And so that's observation number 3. And then observation number 4 is I want to suggest that fatalism is misplaced. Okay, that I think in fact, and this is why I jotted down some of these things and asked you to file them away as potential prick points or areas of weakness if where you think third-party candidates, independent candidates might be able to strategically make a difference. Okay, and so I want to suggest there are some, if we think, think carefully and strategically for true reformers, strategists, people who are brave, who are courageous, who are willing to cut their ties to the establishment of their respective parties. that we can really, I think, brainstorm and consider some meaningful ways of opening things up to the third parties, okay? Okay, question over here.
Over here, I've been waiting.
Oh, have you had a question?
No, I've got,
Have you had a question yet?
yeah,
Okay, so hold on, then we'll give, you've not, so we'll let her go first, okay? You're on.
We have to go back to a little further to divided parties. Remember when we were younger and we had the Dixiecrats that were found as a way into the Republican Party? And how that changed the whole scenario
You bet.
at that time.
Yeah, and we can get into some of the more historical cases and how that changed the party system. I thought you were going in a little different direction, which was talking about divided parties like in government and the way people vote and Republicans and Democrats in Congress, right? And so the divided government for political scientists is always referred to power divided between, right, the branches of government. You have a Republican in the White House in the Oval Office, you have a Democratic majority in Congress, and you have this tension, divided government rather than unified government, right? And I was gonna say that was evidence of a party system that was much healthier because of the breadth across the spectrum, and how you would have Democrats in the House who were more conservative than Republicans and vice versa. So when I was a young lawyer in Minnesota, Dave Durenberger was one of the two Republican senators, and now he wouldn't be a rhino, he would be a center left, he would probably be a Democrat, right? And you can think of lots of examples like that. Yeah.
okay, my take, and then I want your opinion on it, is that the PACs have so much control over what happens within the party structure. And the PACs control who gets to set
So political action committees, right? Yep.
the party's, platform is pretty much set up with a lot of influence from them. And you have people that are seeking a seat, depending on their area, depending on the status they're in and everything. They may have a broader spectrum of ideas and political stances on things. They watch what's going on. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to get elected these days. The money is handed out by those who follow the tax line, follow that party platform. If you draw in, then instead of letting your views show the way you'd like them to show, you draw in because you're gonna get the money then. Then if you don't vote according to the things you said, you're not gonna get the money next time anyhow. So there's a big drawing in on both sides. Pull us in to follow the party line strictly. Don't do this thing like your senator from Minnesota, because you're not gonna get the money to ever get done anywhere. You're gonna lose right from the start.
Please hold the microphone close to your mouth.
Yeah, so the question of like money in politics and the ungodly amounts of money that are spent in campaigns and elections, it's unhealthy, right? Citizens United certainly opened the door for unrestrained group corporate labor spending. Before that ever came along, we had an earlier decision, McConnell, which stripped the parties of their ability to kind of control spending. So you put those two, people often forget the precursor of Citizens United, which was McConnell v. FEC, which kind of stripped the parties of the ability to control money. And then Citizens United comes along and all that money gets pushed outside the party system. So I don't like it. It's unhealthy. It's not fatal. It is not fatal. Not in today's world. Not in today's world. There are too many other ways to reach voters, to move voters, and to win elections. Right? So he who shall not be named got elected president twice, spending far less money than his opponent. okay? I don't like how he uses, Truth Social. I don't like how he's online, but guess what? That's magic, right? If you talk about people who feel alienated, disconnected, disaffected, and you have a presidential candidate who's speaking directly to them through technology, that's a way to win voters. And he wins them, he doesn't only win them, he wins a loyalty from them that I would say is not unrelated to that. And so so I'm more concerned about what money does for office holders with respect to legislation, lobbying, that sort of thing. That's where I
But
really,
if you're going for a seat in the fifth district in Illinois, you vary too much from the party line, you're not gonna get the money to ever get on the ballot or get.
sure, but there's a question whether one needs that to get elected. Like in a world of technology, social media, all sorts of alternative ways of campaigning. I think people still think the way you think, right? So I'm not saying that isn't the mindset. I still think it is the mindset for many. I don't think it has to be. So when we're trying to think more creatively about how third party or independent candidates might penetrate things, they may not have the kind of bank account that the major party candidates have, but that's not to say there are not other ways. So the socialist in New York City, Mondani, right? His prowess on social media and creating a brand and projecting a persona is far more important than the money that, that he had at his disposal. Not that that wasn't important, but there's an example of someone who has a brand and a persona, and he's attractive, he's sharp-witted, and he can and talk about a young army of volunteers in New York City who loved him and were willing to go out and knock on doors and volunteer and do everything in their power to get him the Democratic nomination. So, one more, and then I'm gonna charge forward a little bit. Yep.
So already pointed out that our current president was elected twice without any previous really government experience. Then look at the numbers you showed of the distribution for Republican, Democrat, and Independent at 48%. So you're not starting at zero with a third party candidate. You're starting, give or take, 48%. What if the candidate that emerged that is independent is a well-known celebrity who's very honest, someone like a Tom Hanks? So celebrity against that celebrity kind of environment, does that give that party more credibility?
So you're saying that is he an independent candidate, third party?
I mean, he could be party associated,
Okay.
but it would give the third party more credibility to run someone who's already well known and established,
Right.
whether it's Tom Hanks or Stephen Colbert or someone
Yeah.
that has high visibility.
One more, Kennedy.
Or who?
Kennedy.
Yep. Yeah. So you're getting, because this is like at the end, I wanted us to brainstorm about this is the problem when I open things up. So rabbit hole. Absolutely. I think to sort of take advantage of maybe not have a profile and a name recognition. I have my sort of vision, and it would be kind of a co-presidency. It would be a ticket that would be a co-presidency. And it would be that kind of figure who has broad and bipartisan appeal. So Tom Hanks, yes. Steve Colbert, no. Right. And then match them with a co-president, right? And it's like president, vice president, but then make them co-presidents because the presidency by and large is a public relations job now anyway. Like, why not have someone who goes down easy, who's likable, seems inclusive and broad, and they can kind of be the public figure and they elicit trust, and to match them with someone who actually knows something about politics. So you mentioned Tom Hanks. I say this only half joking, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. No, don't. Who's more admired? He probably doesn't have a political bone in his body. Maybe that's what we want. right? And take someone who's passed through the United States Senate and is retired, so they're no longer attached to their party, and to kind of match him with someone, you know, for you true blue Democrats, Joe Manchin's probably a dirty word, right? But someone like Joe Manchin, right? A conservative centrist Democrat, now retired. Or if you're like lean the other way, Ben Sasse, kind of retired senator from Nebraska. I forget if it was this group, I gave a talk, it may have been a group up in Grand Rapids, and I forget what it was, but I played a 10-minute clip by Ben Sasse. And it was kind of Civics 101. I think it was the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. And every senator gets like a short 10 minutes. And he gave a speech on kind of government politics 101. And the group to which I was speaking, which was decidedly left-leaning, like they got done, he got done. They almost like gave him a standing O. Meaning here was someone, and he's a conservative, but he is also someone who speaks the language that crosses the aisle, and you could have sort of moderate left-leaning Democrats who say, oh, like if we're thinking a third party that's an answer to the extreme number one or the extreme number two, right? Who has that ability to reach across the aisle? So I kind of like that idea of sort of a team. And you can all share your thoughts with me down the road a little bit, okay? All right, so I had those 4 observations, right? Which were, right, the system is broken, our party system is broken. Despite the desire for change, there's this disconnect where we just can't seem that those preferences for third parties don't translate into meaningful third party candidacies. And so people are fatalistic. And observation number 4, I think that's misplaced, and we can get into some of that, okay? And so let me put my cards on the table, which is where I'm coming from when we talk about third parties. And I want to suggest, so someone asked the question, is a third party candidate just a spoiler? Okay, so I was thinking if there are 3, if we are serious about the party system being broken and needing something to jolt it into change and better performance, there are, in my mind, 3 options, okay? One is to move from a 2-party system to a multi-party system. Okay, to throw out our 2-party system, and we're joining the European democracies, and we are becoming a multi-party system. Okay, if we're gonna do it, let's go all in. All right, and we'll be a multi-party system. Choice number 1. Choice number 2 is to jolt the parties themselves into being better and improving, and largely doing that through generating sort of more factionism within the parties and between the parties. What I call factionalism. More intra-party debate, conflict, interests colliding, both within parties and between the parties. Okay, so for me, if I'm talking about things in terms of representation, and the problem with the parties is they are not representing well, that they become too narrow, too rigid. And so they're not sort of representing this incredible diversity that makes up this country. They're incredibly diverse, right? So how do we make them do that better? By making sure the different factions and interests and groups of people are present in each party, that there's give and take, their voices are heard, and you have intra-party conflict, and then you have more inter-party conflict. Option number 2. Okay. Option number 3 is to retain the current 2-party system, but to make it more open or susceptible to meaningful third-party challenges. Okay, keep the 2-party system, but make it more open to serious third-party challenges. Find a way to sort of loosen up the rules and the structures so that they face more serious third-party challenges. Okay, option number one, we're not ready for that. Okay, we're not ready for a full-on multi-party system. It probably would require a constitutional amendment and statutory changes and a whole-scale changing of our politics. It's not gonna happen, and we shouldn't want it to. Okay, and I can tell you the reasons I don't like multi-party systems, and there are plenty flaws, right? It'd be swapping out one set of problems for another. Okay, so I'm checking that one out. And later on, you all can, for those of you who are real reformers, revolutionary reformers, you can argue with me, okay? And tell me why, right? Number two, I do think is the answer to healthy representative parties, is to generate more factionalism and groups and interests within those parties and meaningful negotiation and debate and dialogue and conflict between them. Okay. Number three is what we're here about, because I think number three is the key to number two. And I want to put number two and number three together. So my complaint, number two, parties fail to represent. They're too narrow, they're too rigid, they're too ideological. Okay, by opening the system to more serious third-party challenges, I like that. I want that because it'll make the two major parties better, more representative of the broad swath of interests in America. Okay, so that's kind of my prescription. Okay, and so yeah, quick question, and then we'll go on.
I wonder if the diagnosis of the duopoly that we have is really incorrect. Is our problem maybe oligarchy? Reading the book, Listening to Strangers and other thing else here, we had talked for one about all the media, like the X or whatever bought by Musk or something, how that changed platforms and became more leaning one way. We also have Fox News. When you read about all the things in Louisiana and everything else, there's certain characteristics of people that are voting one way, and a lot of them, get their news in silos from news and stuff like that. And are we seeing an undue influence from the oligarchs, from the super wealthy, if you will, here on both parties that are co-opting their independence?
That's a problem. Yeah, I mean, I look at the president, my students and I in my constitutional law class yesterday were talking about the TikTok ban. This is a good example, actually, right? Where Congress, lo and behold, Congress actually passed a law, a substantive law, huge bipartisan margins, recognizing the problems with China-owned TikTok, right? Mining data, possible manipulation of public opinion in this country, and other threats. Congress did what it was supposed to do, right? They passed a law, okay? They actually passed it during the tail end of the Biden administration. Biden sat on it. He sort of said, I'm not doing anything. I'll leave that to my successor. Trump comes in, he immediately goes to work implementing the TikTok ban, right? No. He suspends it for 75 days. I'm gonna figure out a hand to handle this. 75 days goes by. He suspends it again, another 75 days, that goes by. He suspends it again. This is the person who, during the end of his first term, signed an executive order doing what the legislation eventually did. Okay, here we are, right, 9 months into a new administration, and he is refusing to carry out an act of Congress, right? So I think there's actually two lessons here. Number one, then a report on Friday was, lo and behold, he's made a deal with the Chinese. And for TikTok, right, it is shifting like majority ownership to American investors. Now, who do you think those investors might be? Right, Larry Ellison, is he the Oracle guy? He is a chummy billionaire, right, chums with Trump. Mark Andreessen, who's a financier, billionaire many times over, really chummy with Trump. They're two of the main investors, right? That's oligarchy, that's like Russian in its oligarchiness, right? And you're right, it's like equal opportunity. If you think I'm jumping on one party, it's like equal opportunity. But then the other thing is that, okay, where's Congress? Where's Congress, right? They passed this bill. Like, why are they not filing a lawsuit against the administration to compel execution and enforcement of the law? So yeah, oligarchy, sure, it's a problem, these special interests, that happens in back rooms, but guess what? If we had an operational Congress that took its job seriously, right, that would be at least a significant check on that, I think. So, all right. Okay, so let's look, yeah, we're already on, we just got done with the introduction. But it's all good, isn't it? I feel like this is good. Okay, so you've given me a pass. All right. So let me quickly sort of talk about like the defense of the two-party system, because I feel compelled to do this. Okay. I've given you my talks on both our houses, but someone who has always sort of been a defender of the American two-party system, because I largely think that for most of our history, it's worked pretty well. Certainly not perfect. There are certainly historical hiccups along the way in times where it didn't function well, but the broad arc of party systems in America, I think, has largely served us pretty well. Okay, and that's largely through through most of the 20th century. Like I said, I think we get into the 90s, that's when things really start taking kind of going sideways, and then the last 3 decades, it's really been kind of this breakdown, right? But I always feel the need to make the case, because even when parties worked well, we are a deeply anti-party people, okay? And right, we're all normal people, right? We're not overly engaged in politics. We always see them being partisan, so it's easy to hate on parties, right? But there is always this sort of anti-party sentiment. And I think we need to, like, generally, if I want to make the case that the answer is not to throw out the two-party system, is to reform it, right? Then I need to sort of say, well, here's why I think the two-party system is preferable to going all in on the multi-party system. And that is because the two-party system, it's worked well, and because it is simply the key to large-scale democracy. And it's not going to work otherwise, right? So I studied parties in graduate school, and I actually spent way too much time reading someone named E.E. Schatzsnyder, who was, I was going to say he was a famous political scientist, but political scientists aren't famous. But he was a well-known kind of scholar of parties in the 1950s and 1960s. And he has a simple little quote: "Modern democracy is unthinkable save in terms of parties." And like, he's right. Okay, modern democracy is unthinkable save in terms of parties. So I was trying to, and here's this is a little political science-y, so stick with me here, okay? This is a little conceptual, but thinking about why parties are essential to the workings of our democracy. A country of 340 million, 350 million, whatever we are at, with how many people voted in the last election? 160 million, maybe. And in 2020, that was the COVID election. It was more than that. That's a lot of voters, right? So how do we make a representative democracy work under those circumstances? And my answer is parties, a party system, and that the two-party system actually has done that fairly well, right? So number one, parties are the means of organizing politics. and of connecting citizens to their government. It organizes politics, it connects citizens to their government, it imposes some measure of order on what otherwise would be chaos. Good luck trying to figure out what we would do with 160 million people voting, save parties, okay? Parties bring that order and meaning to elections through what political scientists call the aggregation of interests. They aggregate interests. They lump them, they sort them, they shape them, they put them, when the parties are working well, they put them into coalitions. Okay? And so by aggregating those preferences and by shaping public opinion, right, they give meaning to elections. And they actually make elections decipherable and understandable. So we can actually, because of parties, we otherwise could not do this, because of parties, we can interpret election results, we can kind of roughly try to measure what the voters were saying, right? And then that in turn translates into government. And if a very basic notion of representative politics is people vote, they express their preferences through voting, and that results in government that somehow springs from those preferences expressed in that voting. Okay? And that's what parties do. Okay, and so they provide policy responsiveness, they provide accountability. Okay, all these are fancy words for saying they represent. And that parties are the essential kind of channels or systems or structures of representation in American politics. Okay, now I'm just talking about parties, right? And it's like, okay, well, what about the two-party system? And here I would argue this sort of process of aggregating interest and how that happens when it's an American two-party system that's working well. It does those things well. Okay, it performs those things well. And when we have parties that are right, more inclusive, broader, the coalitions are made up of more issues and groups of voters and preferences, right? That process of representation works better, okay, and works pretty well, okay? So that's like, in a nutshell, right? That's the case for a two-party system. Okay, we said the two-party system is broken. Okay, let me just sort of get through this point, and then we can take maybe take 5 minutes, let me take 5 minutes for a couple more questions, and then we'll call it a day, right? For those American parties, that two-party system to work well, I would argue there need to be several things. And one is they need to be what we call big tent parties, right? And you all probably heard that before, right? That the American system, two parties squaring off, both parties have to be, to a certain extent, big tent parties. Meaning each party and its coalition is made up of a broad array of interests. Okay, and that's when things work well. In a country as diverse as ours, with as many different interests and preferences and political ways of thinking, right, that you need two parties, each of which is big tent, right? And so you go through the nominating process in a presidential election, and each party is negotiating within the party to satisfy those different interests, those different blocks in the Democratic coalition and the Republican coalition. Okay? And so why am I critical of our parties now? Because they are not big tent parties. And they have significantly narrowed. Okay, they've become more ideological. They become dominated by narrow interests. So, right, if we think of big tent versus a party that is just more kind of rigid and constrained by one way of thinking, I think that defines our two major parties today, right? And we can get more specific, and on the Republican side, right? Someone talked about, right, a well-known person, well-known celebrity figure, right, as a third-party candidate. I always think of Donald Trump as a third-party candidate who simply hijacked one party. Like, he really just hijacked the Republic, and he made it his own, right? And he kind of built it like while he was on the fly, but basically remade, and now it's the party of Trump. So if you think of sort of broad, big tent parties, boy, there's not a lot of room for establishment Republicans, for people who are critical of Trump and how he speaks and behaves, right? It is a narrow party, okay? The Democrats arguably are bigger tent in terms of like blocks in the coalition. I would argue they're no more, they are just as sort of ideologically narrow. And it is simply the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which is where the energy is, and it's where, if you're a candidate or an office holder in the Democratic Party, it's the AOCs and the squad, and those folks, you are scared of them. Right? They maybe can't do what Trump has done to his party, but they can start going well down that road. And so AOC and others trying to primary, right, more kind of centrist Democrats, longtime Democratic office holders, right? So that big tent sort of aspect is absent, number one. Number two, for parties to envision, for the two major parties to be what I argue they need to be to do the job well. So big tent parties, number one. That number two are flexible. And they're adaptable. And they respond to changes in the electorate. Okay, so when someone asks, like, why these numbers? And I said, a lot of it has to do with people just not feeling like the parties are responsive to them. Like, they don't answer them. They don't really reflect them. And they don't reflect changes in the electorate. Because I think that likewise characterizes the parties now, the two major parties, that they are ossified, hardened, rigid, implacable, right? They are not flexible and responsive to changes that we see out there. Okay, and that's the problem. All right, and so historically, parties represent by, it's like, oh, challenges arise, or right, we talked about Ross Perot in 1992 when he had his candidacy and got 19% of the vote. What happened between 1992 and 1994? Democrats and Republicans fought like dogs to get the Perot vote. And it was all about fiscal responsibility. He wanted a balanced budget. That was his calling card. Republicans did it better than Democrats. And Gingrich, Contract for America, balanced budget amendment, remember that sort of thing. That was in response to Perot. It was a party being flexible, adapting itself to steal his thunder and to be more responsive in the process. Okay? Bill Clinton did likewise, and it was the key to him getting reelected in 1996. And he responded to the Perot voters. Guess what? He was much more, right? He was a centrist, third way, kind of new way Democrat, trying to hew to the middle. Flexibility, right? We tend to think these politicians just blow with the wind. Well, thank goodness they should, right? Because that's how you represent. Right, it's not like, I don't mean that to be flippant, right? If they have convictions, it's important they stand by those. But the representative function for individual office holders, candidates, and for parties is to respond to change. Okay, and so I would argue, and this has been a function of the last 30 years, going back to 1994. And it's like when I think, why are they this way? Why are they rigid? Why do they fail to respond and to adapt and to be flexible? And I think it's because we are in 30 years of party parity. Okay, and we have the parties that are just about like that, right? So if you think about majority control of Congress since the Gingrich Revolution in 1994, it's been this ping-ponging back and forth of party control over Congress. Because they're so even, right? There's just parity between the parties. That has given them, that has had dire consequences. One would hope that would make them more competitive and responsive. In fact, I think it has given them a myopia that they simply can't see around the next election. And so neither one of the parties has really said, this is what we need to do to create a permanent or at least a long-term durable majority coalition. And instead it has locked them into place because it's all about presidential politics now. It's all about getting your presidential candidate elected so they can pull the levers of the administrative state to advance your purposes. We have 3 minutes left. That's my sermon. Let's, if there are folks who have not yet kind of had the chance to have a comment or a question, we can. If there's no one else, we can go over here.
I think we should look to the economy on this. And the economy is being attacked by the Bitcoin. Who's gonna control Bitcoin? Because things are going that way. And that's a very significant thing. It's in the back room.
And it's like, I don't understand any of this cryptocurrency. Like, I'm sorry, you may well be right, but I believe complete and utter ignorance. So.
This might be just, what's rolling in my head, but part of me wants to ask the question, who's to blame? And I don't mean that to finger point or jump on that bandwagon. It's to find the solution. I mean, who's the solution? Is it us? And to your point, what's the definition of insanity? What's the next move to stop the insanity?
Yeah, so let me, 2 minutes, and we can get into this deeper, like who's to blame? How has this happened? That's a really hard question. And I think there are lots of really kind of deep, lots of big things going around in our culture, right? That have sort of played into this. I talked about the striking parity between the parties. So if we're thinking like political reasons, that parity and them simply kind of giving, I am such a critic of the system we have now with just presidential, it is so presidentially focused, right? Donald Trump is utterly unrestrained. Donald Trump is only the latest iteration of occupants of the Oval Office who have just kept pushing the envelope. Okay, I think I'm doing a talk here later on, right, kind of constitutional challenges coming out of the Trump administration. And it's like, I don't know how I'm gonna do it in 2 class periods, like, give me a few weeks. But everything we can point to him doing, there is a precedent by one of his predecessors. I can go back to Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Trump 1 and Biden. Now he happens to be doing it all at once, right? And he never stops, he just keeps going. My point is we have elevated presidential power to the point where we just are sort of dismissive of typical constitutional constraints, a constitutional arrangement, constitutional values and norms that were in place to protect against precisely the kind of character that Donald Trump is. So that's huge. There are lots of other kind of cultural things going on that I would sort of like the sorting out of our culture that have made it easier for narrow interests to glom onto and control each party. Right, and so some of that is just cultural, where people, right, so we have the rural, small town, big city divide. Right, that feeds in. We have the educational divide, the class divide. Right, and all of this is, we are seeing this remarkable realignment of the two parties. Oftentimes, realignment creates parties that are more responsive, but this hasn't happened in this instance. And these cultural divisions, right, you throw it into the meat grinder of social media and you get the binary ecosystems, echo chambers in the social media. Redistricting has certainly amplified those divisions. So there are a number of things I would argue that have really created this polarized culture. Some of it's political, some of it's culture, right? The kind of the religion secularism divide. I could just keep going. What do we do about that? I don't know. We're out of time, so thank goodness I don't have to be part of that. That's a start. Maybe we can say a little bit more about that next time. Cards. So jot down your cards and maybe I don't know where you want to leave them at the end.
Why don't you just leave them in place and we will collect them
Beautiful,
at the end of things?
beautiful. And we'll do it again next week. Giddy up. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks. Good insights.